You're listening to Conversations That Matter with your host, Terry Conrad.
Hi, everybody. This is Terry Conrad with Conversations That Matter. Hearty topics for hungry minds. And I have brought to you one of my most favorite people on the planet, Nelson Goulart, who, for those of you who've been living under a rock, he's a kind of a big deal here in Canada. He's the VP of, what's your title exactly?
VP of Network Services.
VP of Network Services, Better Homes and Gardens, Canada. Welcome to Conversations That Matter, Nelson. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we go back a ways. We actually met on my birthday a few years ago. Richard Silver brought me out to dinner, and there you were with Amy Chereau and Rob, your partner, and I just hang with the big guys because that's fun to do. And I met you, and I was just like, this is the coolest, most grounded, awesome person I've met in a good long time. We absolutely clicked, and I love your vision. There's so many things I want to dig into with you, and we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about industry. We're going to talk about broker brands, all those things that you and I love to dig into. So let's get started.
Awesome.
Okay. We had a conversation not long ago where you shared your Apple story with me, and I was wondering if maybe you would share that story again with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. I think it relates well for what the consumer expectation is, and for what realtors have to look forward to going forward in the industry on the service levels that they're expected by these millennials, these consumers that are out there, these elusive consumers that everybody refers to.
Right.
So to those of you who don't know, I'm also the broker owner of an office in Mississauga, which gives me a lot of pleasure in working still one-on-one with some of the agents in the industry. And what happened is I went over to have a meeting with the joint venture program with Apple in our marketplace. And they pitched a couple of services to us. And one of the things I got to talking about with the manager, who was a young female millennial type, and I talked to her about her home buying experience. And it was funny because she said to me that, number one, the agent that she had selected was referred by a family member.
Right.
And had done work in the family, which fits in line with a lot of the numbers that we talk about. She also said that he had just purchased, he was an older real estate agent in his mid to late 50s, which fits the demographic of typical Canadian realtor, depending which study you believe. And so she said that when he found out that she was with Apple, that when he went and bought this iPad thing, and he handed it to her, and he said, can you set this up for me? So being the manager in the store, she set that up very easily and very quickly for him to pull listings, to pull all that kind of information.
Right.
Which typically or traditionally, that's what consumers look to us for. They come and look at homes, we give them a stack of listings, they sit quietly beside us, making comments, making notes. So I said to her, so how did you find that experience? And she goes, well, he gave me the listings before he would give them to me on a paper format, which was typical. And then once we had the iPad, he just gave it to me in a digital format of the same paper listings.
Right.
And I could see.
Which most people, that to them is the digital move, right? Like we've moved from paper to digital. So they think that's it.
Okay, I've converted over to digital experience.
Right.
What I noticed is there was a hesitation in her voice. And when I said to her, I said, you really didn't like that, did you? And she goes, not really. And I said, so what would you expect that experience to be like? And then her eyes lit up and she goes, well, what I'd like to see is the high-res pictures of the properties as we're driving to the next property. I'd like to be able to see virtual tours of it because I'm a millennial and time is precious to us. We're busy. We've got all these things on the go. And she didn't use the term millennial, but she says, I'm a young person. I'm busy. Yeah. I've got a lot of things on the go. And she goes, I want to maximize my time in between listings. So I would have liked to have seen virtual tours, as I mentioned, the high-res pictures, everything that allows me that when I walk into that home that I can make a quick decision on whether or not I will consider it to make it my home.
Right.
And I thought that was enlightening because I've never seen it so eloquently put before.
Right. Well, and the thing is like it always happens is we're so stuck in our business or, forest in the trees kind of thing that you can't see what you can't see. And so we forget what it's like to just be a consumer. And we're so busy doing the same job that we've always done. And we're trying to, I think most people are really trying to implement digital and paperless and social, and they're trying to be tech savvy. But it's challenging, right? Like there's so many things, and I think we overcomplicate it. And so to hear it from a consumer point of view, especially someone who's digitally savvy, how we can make that experience richer for her, I think that's really valuable information.
Well, I think there's a lot of peripheral noise in our industry, and some of it's driven by special interest groups who try and sell their product and make it sound like, hey, you really need this cool new thing. And
right.
QR codes was a wonderful example of the industry being sidetracked onto something that really didn't read too much. And I think, so from that perspective, we're always being inundated with a lot of that peripheral noise, and we need that direction, that, that alignment on where we need to do and what we need to provide to enhance that consumer experience.
I completely agree. Interesting note on the QR code. I think the reason that one really failed was that the technology didn't match. The apps on our phones never worked in a way, and for the person who was going to use the QR code, like let's say on the rider on the sign on the drive-by, as you're driving by, you can't keep it focused long enough, and the technology on your phone wasn't good enough to make that a useful technology. But I think that the concept about, take the person directly to the website to see and view the pictures and hear and learn more about that actual listing, I think that in and of itself is probably quite valuable. We're just not quite there yet.
Well, I think what it became was a transition to what, the predictions have been that we're going to augmented reality.
Which is
We're
cool.
seeing it come through on these apps.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing it come through now very commonly in a lot of new services. I was looking at the new Vimo software app that they're going to be using here in our marketplace, and it already starts to utilize some of that. And I think what the QR codes were a transition to help the industry move towards that. But I think ultimately that's the direction we're going to be, where you can point a phone at a building, a condo building, and it'll pull up all the data that's on that building, whether it's neighborhood information, whether it's new listings, whatever the information the consumers need from that location.
Completely agree. And that's so interesting. So back to the Apple story, you also mentioned to me sort of the experience of what it's like to sort of be like in the Genius Bar, and you had some sort of conclusions around like how the brokerage might be able to model some of that.
Well, you see some of that now start to translate down to offices, as democratization of technology has forced offices to downscale without losing the effectiveness of that it's still an office. See, I'm one of those traditionalists only in the sense that I still believe that agents need to come into the office. Not necessarily experienced agents that have a working model, but certainly a large percentage of those newer agents who need the help, the guidance.
Can we bookmark it right there for 1 second? Because I think that's an actually very important point. Why, and I just want you to explain a little bit more about why do you think that's so valuable to come into the office?
Well, there's a gentleman that I had a lot of respect for out of the U.S., out of the Atlanta offices. His name was Joe Dabbs. He's unfortunately long since passed away, but he was a brilliant man and older, wise gentleman. He said to me one day, I said, so what do you think about virtual technology and agents not coming into the office? And he turned to me in his very stoic face and he said to me, I've yet to see a real estate agent become very good in this business, sitting at home watching Dr. Phil and reruns of Oprah.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
There's a dynamic that occurs when agents come into the office. If it's a forward-thinking, dynamic, energetic office that has other like-minded individuals, that makes them ask questions and pushes them.
Well, I can't remember what the term is, but there's a scientific term that talks about just who you spend time with and the thinking that you sort of absorb. It's like osmosis, that you sort of pick up on some of the same thinking. So when you are in a group environment and sharing ideas and talking business all the time, there is a certain amount, I think, of increased growth or opportunity that's just incrementally faster and more absorbing than when you're in the same space and when you come to a place of work that you are in a mindset of being at work versus when you are at home.
Well, the term synergy, I wish I had thought about it because I would have had the definition for you. But synergy basically means that once you've got two separate components, that together they provide far more than either one individually. And that could be energy, that could be excitement, that could be any of those things. And there's just so much to our business. The learning curve is so steep for agents coming into it. The chance of failure is so high.
Agreed.
Last stats I've heard from companies like AlignMark are showing 80% of agents will fail within 2 years of joining the business. And there's something wrong when we have that kind of failure rate.
I completely agree, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more later. Let's go back to where you were, and I took you off track here. You were going to talk more about the brokerage experience, the Genius Bar sort of lifestyle inside the brokerage experience.
Well, that's one of the things I came back with is you could see that these people like to sit in that type of environment, the community environment where they're sharing. We're seeing it, the community tables at Starbucks, and you see it at Apple, people sitting around testing the products. And I think that will be, as offices get reduced in bricks and mortar expense to compete, then you're going to see these types of Genius Bars in real estate offices because I think they're effective. I think that they force agents to collaborate. It's the only way they're going to share if they're sitting across from each other and they're engaging, as opposed to sitting in the traditional bullpens with their backs to each other, cowering over a phone or over their computer. There's something to be said about, especially with the newer agents who are coming into the industry, the millennial types who are looking to, that's how they grow, that's how they learn. And we have to nurture and cultivate that type of environment for them.
Agreed. I read the same thing recently just about how that particular, the millennial generation in particular, are really looking for a collaborative community experience, and that's really important for their, like that, in fact, ranked higher than income, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. And it's hilarious. I have a great time with them because I don't know if it's because I can relate, because although my age is not of a millennial type, as you can see, I love the energy that they bring to the table. We hired several in here in this office last month and last month and a half, and the energy and enthusiasm and passion is exciting. They want to make things happen. They want to change things. They want to get involved. They're ready to roll up their sleeves. Their attention is sometimes a little bit short, so you have to be able to present to them and get them to focus on things. But once they do and they see the results, it's amazing. It's amazing.
So cool. That's so cool. So now, since we're here, let's just go right into why Better Homes and Gardens for you, because you weren't, obviously this is new in Canada. Maybe you could tell us that story about how you got involved with Better Homes in Canada. Like where did you come from and how did this all happen?
Well, I've been a realtor since 1989, so I've seen markets go up and markets go down, and you've seen brands come and go. And one thing I do believe still, even though there's a lot of discussion on it, is that there is some significance to having a brand in the process. Not necessarily because the agent needs it, because they may be strong and have all the tools that they need. But for newer agents, they need that guidance and support of some of the tools that the brand brings. And the brand brings what we need most, which is for consumers, the trust, the confidence, and that you're not dealing with a fly-by-night company, that you've been, that it's a name that's trusted and well-regarded. And with Better Homes and Gardens, that we have. It's a brand that's been around since 1924. And consumers relate, whether it's the magazine or now the real estate side of it, they relate in a positive way.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, I've been attracted to the BH&G brand for quite a while now. I've known Sherry Chris for many years, and we did an interview with Leighton Dees here a couple weeks ago.
Amazing. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Alyssa Hellman just went and joined Zach over down at Go. So lots going on in the BH&G brand. It is really different. It caught my eye immediately. I'm a design girl. I'm a brand girl. And so when I first heard Sherry Chris talk about it and talk about the lifestyle brand, I was like, this is brilliant. I love the direction of the company. Clearly you did as well, because you guys now own Better Homes and Gardens Canada. You have the licensing for the entire country, yes?
Yes, we have licensing for all of Canada, and And we're very proud to represent the brand, especially when you have a team like Sherry and all of the people that we have at our head office who get the lifestyle brand. Sherry and all of the BH&G team started talking about lifestyle before it was popular
Agreed.
to do so. We were going back to 2008 when the brand was launched. We talked about hyper-local. We talked about communities. And Sherry has been amazing at pitching and telling that story in a very authentic way that I believe a lot of brokers can relate to.
Well,
and
frankly,
we're seeing it now being picked up by other people and other brands.
I agree. I think she's absolutely led the troops on that one. So when you got the licensing for all of Canada, what's sort of like the big vision for the brand across the country?
Well, initially, when you're bringing a new brand into the Canadian marketplace, you're looking at, spreading your wings a little bit, getting representation across the provinces and the Canadian culture and the Canadian landscape, and that's no small challenge.
No
One
kidding.
of the things that we don't relate to as Canadians or don't fully understand is that although we're 1.5 times the size of the U.S., we're only 10% of their population.
Yeah.
And that poses some challenges for growth of brands. That poses challenges for technology. And so sometimes even when we're comparing what's going on in Canada to what's going on in the U.S., it's not really a fair comparison because once you remove a couple, cities like Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Halifax, what you're left with is a country with many small communities with their story to tell,
right,
and sparsely populated. They're an hour and a half apart from each other.
Right. So what's your strategy? How do you tackle that?
Well, you reach out to those who are interested. It's a larger challenge in the Canadian marketplace because for some reason Canadians are more heavily franchised in pretty much all the sectors compared to the U.S. The U.S. still has a lot of independent companies, and in Canada there's a lot more offices that have franchised with various different brands, and even we're hearing of different mergers, changes in banners, and that will continue across Canada, but it's a longer process. You have to stay the course because people are under contract, and you don't want to interfere with other people's contracts, so you have to wait, and you have to time the process, and you have to allow time for the growth of the brand.
Completely understand that. So, and that's something that we don't think about. Of course, you're under contract, and of course, you're respecting that. The question then is so if a broker was interested in shifting gears, why would they come to BH&G?
Well, I think there's several reasons. I think their vision, for one, is proven now that others are adopting our talk about lifestyle brand. Even we've conducted studies and just recently on the Generation Z group of individuals, those kids that are coming in behind the millennials. When it comes to generational studies, we've led the way with that and continue to do so in that first of its kind Generation Z study for the industry. So I think you want to pair yourself with people who understand where the industry is going, where technology is taking us, but still holding on to a lot of the grassroots of the basics still of real estate that you still need to buy and sell a house. Sometimes people are so busy out there trying to move forward with new technology that at the end of the day, you still have to be a good salesperson and know all of your sales skills and know them well to still be able to transact real estate.
Totally agree. Now, having said that, though, you are always very current. I know I see you at all the conferences. You're staying ahead of the curve. You're making sure that you're heading down to other brokerages and finding out what they're doing that's working or not working. So I know that you are really, truly ahead of the curve, and that's why I look to you for your guidance and your vision. Why don't we talk a little bit about the industries a little bit more, because you did touch on the fact that we're Canada, we are not the United States, we are a much smaller market in a very broad landscape. What do you think are the primary differences? Like, in my opinion, I've always felt that we're, feels like about 10 years behind. It feels like, just like I've often used this analogy, like when social happened, the PR world sort of did a collective, they felt this like whoosh past them, and then they did this collective look up and went, what the hell just happened? And I feel like real estate in Canada is somewhat similar, where they haven't had to make any crazy moves just yet, but it's coming to a point where you're either innovating and getting ahead of the trends, or you're going to be left a little bit behind. What is your position on that?
I don't agree with that necessarily, that we are left behind. I think sometimes too often, and historically that may have been the case, where we've looked to the U.S. for, everything that's new and that's trending and that's happening. And what we're seeing is, like, for example, in technology right now, we're fortunate to have the Canadian Real Estate Association that's combined their efforts to put together what we call a DDF feed, a single database feed to the industry, both for franchises, for the agents, for their websites. The U.S. would kill for something like that they would have one standard feed coming from a respected body like CREA is. It tends, if you don't have that, it tends to fragment. And I think we've done a great job of that. Could we do better in improving the consumer experience on MLS.ca? Absolutely. But have we done a good job with it in maintaining control and integrity of our data in Canada? There's no doubt we're proving that it's been the right decision and they've sought the right course.
I agree. That's a really interesting point, especially on the heels of the NAR announcement. I don't know if you noticed, but Playster will be partnering with NAR in providing those $5 IDX websites. And I think the argument is now is like, well, is there any value in even having an IDX feed? Because where is the consumer actually doing their shopping? Down in the States, of course, it's pretty much Zillow and Trulia or Realtor.com where they're sourcing those listings. So does an agent or brokerage even need that IDX feed anymore? It's an interesting question. I don't have an answer. I'm wondering what you think.
Well, that's a really great question, because I was involved at an Inman event and even one of our in-brand broker conferences where we interviewed buyer consumers who were millennials, and they kind of shared their first point of contact with the industry. And in the U.S., it was Zillow and Trulia by far. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
Realtor.com came in a close, like a distant third at that time. I even conducted a consumer panel of buyers and sellers in Canada last year at the Rebar Camp West End in Mississauga, and it was surprising to see that consumers in Canada don't find that any alternative sites to be as good for information or that provided to their satisfaction. The site they came up with all the time as their number one starting point for information online was Realtor.ca or MLS.ca, which is a marked difference from what's happened in the U.S., where Realtor.com used to hold that spot and has since lost it.
Agreed. And it's so interesting. And I mean, the whole Zoocasa conversation is an interesting one as well. I don't know how much you want to get into that, but I find that, since they've become a brokerage, it's such a completely different proposition. I think where they were going as a Zillow made sense, but but maybe it doesn't make sense. I have no idea what's going on in the back end, but in terms of profitability, where could they make their money when they have such a small market? I'm not sure. So
that's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
They took a different approach in taking a brokerage model, and they have the right to do so. That's their vision for the direction to go.
Yep.
I don't believe that is a viable model in the Canadian landscape, simply from a feasibility. The data information, hey, I'm all for getting consumers, creating an amazing and exceptional consumer experience. But once you cross over to the brokerage model, it just changes what you can provide and how you can provide it. And again, you're always stuck with the demographics in the Canadian marketplace of, we're 10% of the U.S. population. We're spread across the thin ribbon on the southern side of the country. Yeah. And is it financially viable for some of those to come in? I'm not going to say it is or that it isn't, because for all we know, some person in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, could be working on some software in his garage right now that could revolutionize things in Canada, and that would be wonderful if it's to everybody's benefit.
Agreed.
Technology is going through a lot of changes, and a realtor's use of it is one of them.
I agree. So okay. So let's go. This is a perfect transition into the whole NAR versus CREA. We've just come off the heels of a really pretty competition bureau fight, and I know that you're really proud of what CREA has done for the industry. I think a lot of people, especially down working, nose to the grind, doing their deals, really struggle to understand what the value is in their association. And not to say that there's no value, but I think everyone's going to agree that how that value is communicated, there's been a bit of a disconnect there. What do you think are the challenges for how the associations need to maintain relevance moving forward?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question, but I'll give my personal opinion with it.
Okay.
I think Canada needs a strong, unified national voice more than ever.
And?
The changing landscape of technology and how we convey our transactions is changing by the minute. Mm-hmm. And you need a strong voice to protect Canadian interests in real estate, in the real estate industry. And I've always voiced that I would have liked to have seen CREA take more of a role front and center for the industry, as NAR has in the U.S. And it's nice to see that in the last few years, and maybe it was fueled by the Competition Bureau, maybe FinTrack requirements, because there's been so many issues that have come forward on a national level that we've needed to see CREA step in, and they have. Mm-hmm. And for a volunteer organization, I think the people who've been there have done an exceptional job of stepping in and bringing them, elevating their position to the industry. There's those who feel that they may not have a place, but I'm not one of them. I think we need them, again, because of our demographics for Canada, that, whether you're in a small community in Alberta or Quebec or Vancouver or a major city like Vancouver or Toronto, we need to have a national voice. Now, how that's going to be framed out to make everybody happy, that's a different challenge in itself. Yeah. But doing them, yes.
So that's so interesting, and I of course agree with you. It's just like any government organization. I mean, municipal is great, and you see the hands on the ground doing the work, but that big overriding vision. Again, I think this is like any business too. Is like what's the overall vision? Where are we taking it? What are the trends moving forward? We need somebody sort of driving that train. And hopefully they're connected enough with their people that they because we went through that whole rethink. Was it rethink? The where they were right where and I sat on a session down at Connect one year, and it was really interesting to me where they were talking to industry leaders and canvassing and trying to figure out where's the industry going, how do we want to shape the future of real estate. And I'm not sure we came up with any great conclusions, but I thought it was an interesting exercise, at least to be asking the questions.
Well, I think it's great, and I think one place we will see a lot of changes, and have begun to see it already, is at a provincial level. I think technology is now caught up to the point that do we need necessarily all the boards at that level and in different regions of the provinces? Is there, are we at the stage that you may start to see provincial boards and associations take care of, start to now provide MLS services and we're already seeing it at a local level, whether you call it data sharing, whether you call it mergers or consolidations, for you to justify your existence, you have to be able to provide value to realtors who are your members, and those boards that cannot provide that, unfortunately, I think will be left behind. So either they have to consolidate or data share, as we're talking about, or they have to, or they may find that they're extinct. They're no longer providing education in Ontario. So
they're not providing education at all in Ontario?
Well, they have the facilities, but the CEU credits have been dropped, and now RICO is going to be providing that. So a lot of those local board functions that were provided before will now be gone. So if a board isn't making any financial revenue from providing training for CEU credits and does not have an MLS system, what's it doing anymore?
Right, exactly right. Which brings me back to you as a broker owner. You and I have talked a lot about what a brokerage should be providing to their agents, what the broker should be expecting from his agents. You do a lot of, I know, coaching yourself internally, which I think is so awesome. I don't think enough brokerages do that. What would be the definition between what do you think that the association should be providing, and then what should you be providing for your agents?
Well, I think there are two separate ones, because I think what the boards have to do, and then they're starting to do, and we're seeing it all across Canada, is they're providing support They're bringing in relevant technology. You're seeing MLS systems that are dramatically superior to what we saw even just 2-3 years ago.
Right. Okay.
Seeing apps as we move now, transition to mobile devices, they provide a higher level of vision to support the local broker.
Got it.
The local broker, in turn, has to be able to turn that information into a functional part of his business and getting those agents up and running, or either one of two things: is improving their current performance, or helping them to get up and running faster. And in our marketplace, it's a huge challenge. The Toronto Real Estate Board has 40,000 real estate agents last year. And if they think that's scary, think of it this way: 12,000 of those agents didn't sell a single property in the last year.
I don't understand that. Yeah.
58% sold 4 homes or less.
And I'm going to touch on another sticky subject, the whole licensing problem that I see. And I mean, I know dollars and cents have to make sense, but at the same time, do you believe that the way that we onboard career people, like get them in through the licensing system and get them becoming realtor, like have we done a good job of attracting the right people and setting them up for success out of the gate?
I don't think so, and the numbers prove we haven't. I may not have the solution to that, but I know one of the things that we've done locally here in our office is, whereas before we felt, we'll give them instruction, we'll give them information, and they will, eventually adopt and start to implement. And what we found is new agents who began with us, they always meant to get to things. I'm working on it. I'm getting ready. Well, 6 months, 8 months down the line, they were still getting ready.
Right.
And it's not a coincidence that the longer it takes for them locally to write their first transaction, the higher their chances of failure.
Interesting.
Agents don't realize that the day they start, that they get their real estate license in Ontario alone, they're already 3 deals behind.
Right.
When you factor in the time and money that they've spent in getting their license, they're already 3 deals behind. So what we've done here is locally is a very different approach, and we've only implemented it in the last couple of months, but we're already seeing huge results, is that the agents now, when they're starting, they're being brought in for a couple hours of orientation, but not just orientation. Intranet systems are being set up, website pages are being set up. A lot of things are being implemented within that first week to get them out there, because we're the type of business that part of what we're going to learn, you can learn in the classroom. That's the reality.
Agreed.
But then there's that other part that you learn by doing. There's not a single real estate agent that can be an effective real estate agent if he never writes a deal, never knocks on the door, never calls an agent, never creates a website, doesn't return a lead call.
Agreed.
Any of that.
But I feel like, when you go through that graduating process, if you come out with anything, it's this complete fear of making a move. I mean, that's the one thing that's hammered home is, for God's sake, don't get into realtor jail, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a huge fear for them, and it almost paralyzes some of them. But I think it's one of those things that there again is that situation where they have to be in that office. One of the things we do with them is they come in, and for those 2 hours or 3 hours, they're set up on the intranet. Their touches are already laid out for them. So within the first week, they could already have a program set up for the next, 5, 6, 7, 8 months with touches. Many agents will sit there looking at systems and tools that any of the main brands provide, and they're afraid to click on this or send that.
Yep.
I'd rather have them sending out things and making mistakes by accident on postcards and touches and having to correct it, because that's where they learn.
Agreed. I completely agree. That's a beautiful thought. A lot of people are so paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake, and that's where all the growth happens, of course. I completely agree with that. So before I let you go, I would love for you to say, I kind of have an idea, but I'm wondering, do you hire just anybody? Can anybody come and work at your office?
I wouldn't say anybody, but I would say that one thing I've learned through these years of hiring agents is there is not a study, there is nothing out there that allows us to clearly understand what is a successful agent and what's not. I've had people come through, I thought, wow, this person's going to be fantastic, you know, and they flopped. I've had people who haven't, you know, demonstrated any like great, you know, hey, this person's going to be great, and they've achieved great things. So I think what you have to do is you use common sense.
Yep.
And a lot of the things can be garnered in the initial conversations, and very quickly you start to see who's doing what they're supposed to be and what not. But our industry is not rocket science.
Right.
It's a very simple business. Go out, find a buyer, find a seller, list them, or sell them a property.
Yes.
And stay in touch with them. We still know, even though that's simple, 80-something% of agents don't stay in touch with their clients.
So it's such a ridiculous number. It's not even funny, but I do think that, like you said, keep it simple. And we've overcomplicated everything. And it's a simple matter of, you know, just having that list and knowing who your people are and just maintaining that connection is so vital.
Oh, absolutely. And technology's done a great part in generating more business. But all I hear lately is about leads and leads and leads. And all I'm seeing is people not returning calls and not following up on those leads. So what good are leads if you're not going to follow up on them?
That's a whole other conversation.
Oh, that's a huge one.
Yeah, that is a huge conversation because I feel like there's the whole, because we're an internet age and everyone's sourcing those, like they're looking for those new internet leads, and there's entire website platforms built around, you know, and SEO'd out the wazoo so that they can make sure that they're sending you leads. And measuring whether or not a lead is good or not, to me, seems like this magical place that I don't understand at all.
Well, I don't think the industry understands it all, and it's being waved like where it's a magic pill here that,
Yes.
you know, if you're generating leads, well, how good are the quality? I'd rather have less leads but have higher quality than to have a lot and have to screen them through. And what you define as lead may not be what I define as a lead.
Right. Interesting. Well, but one last thing quickly, because this is something that I know you and I really touch on a lot. And I think, like, I've always looked to you as a very strong leader in our industry. How important is leadership, do you feel, at all levels?
I think leadership is more critical now than it ever has been before. And I'd like to say that it's an age thing, but in the reality, it's not. I think it's a mindset thing. And I think leadership is critical, that the leaders of tomorrow in brokerages, see, I still believe that brokerages are a great natural progression of a successful agent in owning their own brokerage. But I think if they do it just with the intention of herding people into an office, they're doing themselves a disservice, and those agents, and they're a disservice. I think the leadership component is that, from a broker perspective, that our job is to get those agents motivated, inspired, whatever we need to do to assist them in becoming great realtors.
Right.
We have a growing problem on the horizon, and that's that in Canada, the average age of realtors is anywhere from 55 to 60, again, depending which study you believe. Different one comes out every day.
Yep.
And what's going to happen when they're no longer in the picture?
Yep, I agree, Ed. So what would be your advice to a young broker? Where should they, especially if they're selling? Like, don't you find, like any agent who's busy with their heads down and working, all this stuff out here becomes so much more work, and it's hard to vet and filter and know what to focus on. Well, a broker is going to struggle with the same thing, especially if they're selling. So I'm trying to run a brokerage, I'm trying to be this amazing leader, but I also have a business, and probably my selling business is creating much more of a revenue and income stream for me than my brokerage is. So how do you do that?
Well, I think the planning component is critical. And one of one piece of advice that I received when I got into becoming a broker was, it's a very different perspective when you're sitting one side of the table as a broker than you are on the other side as a realtor. And I said, no, I laughed it off, and I said, no, it can't be that difficult. Well, I can assure you it is. It's a whole different world, and there's so much more involved to it. And I think that's why you need to, as a young leader, I said, we need them. We need you. So we need more new leaders coming into the industry, but don't come into the industry thinking that there's going to be a simple solution, that it won't take a lot of work, and that it's not going to take effort. I think they have to come in and be prepared to roll up their sleeves. They may have to sell homes for a little while as they start to grow their following. And I think there is still tremendous opportunity out there as some of the older segment of our industry starts to phase itself out for some new, young, dynamic, but not naive people coming into the business who understand that this is a great business. We help people every day with their largest investment. And if you just stay in touch with them, they will call you back.
Yes, and you as a broker and as a company owner are also making that huge contribution. You are helping agents develop careers every day, which I think is awesome. And thank God they have you.
Personally, there's nothing more fulfilling for me in what I do, whether it's with the national perspective or with the local office level, than empowering other people to succeed.
Yep.
Whether it's opening an office somewhere and seeing them take off, or an agent who walks in and one day is dreaming of making $100,000 gross income, and then 4 years later they're making $500,000 in gross income.
Crazy.
And it's just amazing. And to know that you were a little part in that, because you're not the one who's out there late at night, they are. You're not the one who's putting family events on hold. You've done that. You've had your stage. But that you as a broker had the ability to empower in just a little way the success of those agents, that alone makes it rewarding.
I love that. So I usually ask this question at the tail end of all of my conversations that matter. It's a legacy question. And so my question to you is, what do you want your legacy to be? What's the most, I think we've just touched on it, the most meaningful to you?
I think what we just touched on, that I'd like people to, I look back on one of my first brokers, and I still think he was probably one of the best brokers I came across. I did not know it at the time. But looking back years later, a lot of his advice came true. And I hope that the people who cross, our paths here, that we're blessed to come across in their real estate career, that they look back 10, 20 years from now and go, wow, he pushed us in a gentle, good way, but he believed in me when no one else would believe in me. When people said, hey, you're not going to cut it, that's a tough business. And I hope that, they recognize and say, hey, he had a little part in that. It was good. And without that little push, I may not be where I am today. So, and I'm happy to take a little part of that.
Well, and you have been that influence for me as well. So I am super grateful to know you and to call you my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I do think it's a conversation that matters. I think we've touched on some really important things, and I'm sure we will dig in even more as we go forward. But thank you so much for taking this time, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.
It's my pleasure, Terry, and you've just done an amazing job, and I've watched you blossom even further with your passion and your enjoyment and your desire to improve this business. We've had a lot of deep discussions over the years, and we need people like you out there looking in on us and saying, hey guys, why don't you look at it this way? Why don't you think about it a little bit different? You're a vital role to what we do, and don't ever stop doing what you do.
Thank you. That's so sweet. I love you. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.